Welcome to Feminism Today, everyone. I'm Sophia Johnson in New York. Angeline Boulley is an award-winning author who joins us this week to talk about her new novel, Warrior Girl Unearthed, a high-stakes thriller about the power of discovering your stolen history. Now, for those of you who don't know her name, you should. Angeline's debut work, Firekeeper's Daughter, was named one of the top 100 young adult novels of all time by Time magazine and is a New York Times bestseller to be adapted into a miniseries by Higher Ground on Netflix. Angeline Boulley, welcome to Feminism Today.
Hello, it is a pleasure to be here.
We're obviously going to talk about your new book, Warrior Girl Unearthed, which will be released on May 2nd, I think your publisher said. But I want to begin, if you're open to it, with Firekeeper's Daughter, a fictionalized story inspired by your own experiences here. The character, Donius Fontaine, struggles with her biracial background. And I wanted to know from you from the outset, what do people get right or wrong about the biracial experience?
Well, I really can only speak to my own experience, and Donis takes after me in certain ways. So, we both have an Ojibwe father and a non-Native mother, and a grandmother who did not care for Native Americans at all. And, I did grow up like Donis, feeling like I didn't quite fit in, either in non-Native spaces and also in Native spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just tried to capture that. And I think the surprise for me has been how many people, teens and adults, have the story has resonated with them. I didn't realize that it would resonate with so many other biracial teens, and even people who don't identify themselves as biracial or multiracial, that they really embrace Donis and the struggle that she goes through in claiming her identity and finding her place in the world.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood. You grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. I read somewhere that you've been working on the book for about 10 years or so. What was your childhood like? What was life like on the reservation?
Well, I didn't grow up on the reservation. I grew up downstate. My dad is from Sault Ste. Marie, Sugar Island, and he met my mom in the Navy in Chicago. And so they settled in Southwest Michigan. But every summer we would go to Sault Ste. Marie and, spend summers on Sugar Island with my grandparents and cousins. And so that was really my connection with my tribal community, was every summer, just playing with cousins and, sitting beside a campfire and listening to my grandparents talk and tell stories, and seeing a side to my dad that I really, I would notice certain differences of ways that he maybe was a little different than how he was with us during the rest of the year.
Yeah. Now, I read it took you somewhat about 10 years to work on the manuscript. Is that true?
Yes. Well, even longer than that. I had the idea for the story when I was a senior in high school, and then I didn't start writing until I was 44. And so it took 10 years from that point. And so I published at 55. And so the story was just a long work in progress.
I love it. And just the depth and the time. I mean, it's stunning to me, the breadth and the scope and the reach. You feel transported into this space. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, Firekeeper's Daughter centers around an investigation into a new form of crystal meth coming out of an Ojibwe community in Michigan. Where does the truth end and fiction pick up?
The truth comes in that when I was a senior in high school, my best friend went to a different school nearby,
Mhm.
and she told me about a new boy senior year that she thought he might be my type. And
Mm,
I ended up not meeting him because it turned out that he didn't play sports and he hung out with the really hardcore stoners.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, as they would say, that wasn't on brand for me.
yeah,
And so I never met him. And then a month before graduation, my friend said that there had been a drug bust in their community. And it turned out that the new boy had been an undercover uh, police officer. And this was like just a couple years before 21 Jump Street, the
yeah,
original series with
yeah,
Johnny
yeah,
Depp. So for me, the idea that this young looking law enforcement officer was posing as a high school senior to find out who was behind this drug, that was the origin story,
yeah,
really the spark of that became Firekeeper's daughter, because I started to think, what if it was a federal drug investigation on a
yeah,
reservation? And what if this, the me in the story
yeah,
was excellent in chemistry, but also knew about traditional medicines like plants and
yeah,
as healing medicines.
yeah,
And what if she was connected to everybody and everything? She really would be an excellent confidential informant for a drug investigation. But then you have to create a scenario where in my in on my reservation, the FBI and the Bureau of Indian Affairs are not necessarily the good guys.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I had to create compelling stakes of why this young woman would reluctantly at first agree to be part of this undercover investigation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just find it breathtaking. So, just to back up a little bit, how did you finally take the leap for those people out there thinking about writing? At what point did you make the leap and say, "Yes, I'm going to write this book"? And how long did it take you to sort of lean into the idea, get it on paper? Because 10 years is really a very long time. Talk to us about what that experience is like to to take action on an inspired idea.
Well, up front, I think I had a midlife crisis in my 40s,
Yeah.
and just suddenly I realized that best case scenario at 44, there probably was, um, you know, best case scenario, equal amount of sand in the hourglass in the
Yeah,
bottom and the top.
yeah,
And, time was going so quickly. I was married and I had three children. My sons were in high school and my daughter was in a preteen.
yeah,
And it just hit me that if I haven't accomplished the dreams I've always had for myself, the goals that I've wanted to do,
yeah.
what was I waiting for? And
Mm,
I decided that I could live with failure. I could live with um, trying to write this story that had been in my mind somewhere since I was 18
mm,
and having it not be a good story. I could handle that
yeah,
easier than I could handle never trying and always wondering what if I would have pursued, writing? What if I
yeah.
would have tried to figure out this story and get it on paper?
Now, do you think it would have been a different story if you wrote it at 18 than when you actually began the writing process at 44?
Absolutely. I am so glad that I didn't start writing until I did. Um, and I'm very glad that it was after 10 years of writing and rewriting
Mm.
that was the manuscript that I got my agent with and the book deal, because it wasn't the same story.
Ah,
If I had tried to write it at 18, I think it would have been a romance, and
ah,
it would not have had the depth, certainly, that um, the layers and the nuance that the final book did.
yeah,
And even, the first draft that I wrote,
yeah,
my sister is the only one that has read that draft,
yeah.
and I don't know what was going on in my mind, but it's definitely not young adult. Um, it was
What is
Like
it? Harlequin?
it I think it would be shelved in a very different part of the library. Yeah,
Okay.
in the bookstore. It was very erotic.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll just say it. I don't know what was happening. But, each time I would start a new draft, I would take time in between and I would do research. I would, read my draft and see what I had done well and what I needed to improve on. And then research. I would research and I would try to find out, uh, how to write better dialogue, how to create tension in
Ah,
a scene. But I would also reread my favorite books and see how those authors wrote in such a voice.
yeah,
What was it about that first uh, chapter that created a compelling character and interesting stakes and an inciting incident, like quickly. And I learned through reading.
yeah, 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 of course. So you leaned into it, you wrote the book, you finished the manuscript. Firekeeper's Daughter is a groundbreaking success, New York Times #1 bestseller. How did that settle on you? That a story about an Ojibwe teen um, was so attractive, so compelling, and so engaging, and that the narrative resonated with so many people. How did that feel?
I think I'm still on cloud nine about it. I have often read that quote by James Joyce that in the particular we find the universal. And I think that has helped me of that I could tell this Ojibwe story. And yet so many people that it's resonated with them. And, Donna's is uh, claiming of her identity and finding her place in the world.
Mhm.
I think that there are some themes that are universal, identity, grief, and
Mm,
justice. Who gets it and who doesn't? And
yeah.
those are the things that I think. Had I tried writing the story when I was younger and didn't have the experience and uh, uh, life experience
Yeah.
and seeing a fuller picture, I think I might have tried to make the story go a certain way and it would have been different. And I'm very happy with, the story that was published.
Yeah. So the very same month it was announced that it was a New York Times bestseller, um, the rights were purchased for a series, to be adapted on Netflix. Can you tell us a little bit about how the novel caught the eye of the Obama's Higher Ground production company? How did that happen?
Well, actually, it was October of 2019, and I had just the auction for the North American publishing rights for my book. There were 12 editors at Big Five Publishing that were interested, and so I received an incredible offer from Macmillan,
Okay.
Holt Books for Young Readers,
Yeah.
um, and it got a lot of buzz.
Yeah.
And so then Hollywood came calling right after that. So it was literally 2 weeks to the day from when I had my book auction to when I
Yeah.
had reached an agreement with Higher Ground.
Wow.
Um, there were 8 different companies that were interested in optioning the film rights.
Yeah.
Um, and so I spoke with each of the people in those companies, and I said, representation is one of my core values, and to me
Mhm.
that means um, telling a story where it's not just native creative talent in front of the camera, but also behind the camera, in the
Yeah.
writer's room, and at every level of production.
Mhm.
And there was one person from a different company that I obviously did not go with.
Yeah.
And he said, well, gee, are there even any native screenwriters? And I just thought, why would I choose to do business with someone that I'm going
Yeah.
to have to do Indians 101? Of course, there are Indigenous
Yeah.
screenwriters. And the fact that someone in his position wouldn't know about it is just the hugest red flag.
Right.
And the response from Higher Ground
Mhm.
was the exact opposite. They made it clear that telling stories that haven't been told yet, that was
Mm.
their core value. And they already knew about different networks of Native screenwriters, and they already had, people that they were interested in and
Mhm.
wanted my suggestions for people. That's You give up so much control as an author if
Yeah.
you sell the rights for your story for film.
Yeah.
um, and so really your only choice is, do you sell? And if so, who do you choose to do business with? And so for me, just Higher Ground, I just felt confident that they got what my project was about, what my story was about, and
Yeah.
that they would honor my vision for this Native creative talent that we see now
Yeah.
in like Reservation Dogs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
um, the idea of an all Native writers room and Native directors, in addition to,
Yeah.
it, yeah. But we were talking about this in 2019, and
Wow. Just like that.
right.
Unbelievable. And
October
so,
was a great month.
yeah, I bet, but also so inspiring, right? Because there's so
Mhm.
many of us women, mothers who put things on hold for years because we're like, no, the kids are small. And it's just like, no, well, they need me. And you keep doing that. And what I'm hearing from you is that, when you have an inspired idea, take action, because it's not going to leave you. It's going to be that thing that's just sort of nagging. So I'm very much inspired by you and your story. So thank you for that. Let's talk about the new book, Warrior Girl Unearthed. You're taking us back to Sugar Island, and critics are already very excited. It's a high stakes thriller about the power of discovering your stolen history. Why did you write um, the second book? How did this come about?
Well, um, after I got my agent, and I was working on kind of a revise, and I was working on a revision based on some feedback that my agent Faye Bender had given me.
Mhm.
And she was like, and I'd like to talk with you about where you see your career. Is this the only book that you have in mind, or do you have other? Because once we take this manuscript on submission, editors will want to know what else you have.
Yeah.
And it really sent me thinking, like, what do I have? Am I just this one story?
Mm.
And yeah, I happened to be out and about. I was living in DC, and I was walking around a certain neighborhood, and just all of a sudden this character popped into my head, and she said, I stole everything they think I did, and even stuff they don't know about yet. And I just thought, who is this person? I
Yeah.
I knew that I didn't want to go with Donis as the main character because frankly I was exhausted, and I wanted to challenge myself as a writer to write a character who is completely different than
Yeah.
Donis.
Yeah.
I did not find it challenging to write Donis 2.0, her next adventure. That didn't excite me. And so this character popped into my head, and I knew instantly, who she was. We've already met her in the first book.
Mhm.
And that Warrior Girl would take place 10 years later.
Yeah.
And I pitched it as Indigenous Lara Croft, with
Love
the
it.
main character raiding museums to retrieve stolen ancestors and sacred items. And of course, none of her heists go the way that she planned.
Yeah. Is it easier to write the book the second time around?
Yes and no. Uh, Firekeeper's Daughter took 10 years.
Yeah.
Warrior Girl Unearthed took 1 year. And I am not a fast writer. Uh, and
I don't
so
believe it.
and I had to become a different type of writer.
Wow.
So much of Firekeeper's Daughter was finding the story. Like I always knew how I wanted it to start and how I wanted it to end, and who one of the villains would be. But everything, I mean, so much really changed. Um, and with Warrior Girl, I
Mhm.
really had to be very intentional and become much more of an outliner. I think I sent my editor a 20-page Excel spreadsheet with um, every, you know, like instead of a synopsis, I sent her this, you know,
Yeah.
20-page spreadsheet with the story outlined. And um, yeah, it was a different process.
To that point, I also read that for the first book, anyway, you had sort of taken on the sort of immersive experience to I saw it read it in Rolling Stone magazine that you needed to learn how, for example, the Met Labs, like you needed to sort of take on some sort of immersive experiences to help illuminate the experience that you were trying to take the reader through. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I really, you know, I wanted to tell this truthful story. I wanted to have it be rich with details. And even knowing that these details about, you know, this drug issue in that when meth just swept across the country, and it wasn't just my community or other Native communities, it was everywhere.
Mm,
And um, so wanting to make sure that there was accuracy with it, but certainly not a how to.
yeah,
um,
yeah,
but yeah, I did. I learned different methods of making crystal meth and how to identify clandestine meth labs. And the reason why that research was important is because
yeah.
Donis needs to learn, and part of her training is how to recognize certain things, paraphernalia, certain,
Mm,
uh, you know, lingo,
mhm.
and that's what she needs to know to make her a better confidential informant, to know exactly what she's looking out for. And
Yeah, yeah,
then for her surprise, it's to see items in people's homes that she knows,
yeah,
and to realize that uh, that this drug ring is hitting close to home.
yeah. How does Warrior Girl, um, what are some of the distinct characteristics about Warrior Girl as opposed to Donis's character?
Perry is she is impulsive. She's funnier. She's very clever, and you know, if she thinks it, she says it. She is impulsive and will leap first and think about consequences far down the road, if ever.
Mhm.
And so she was fun to write. But the topic, and this can be such a serious subject. Museums and institutions and private collections that have our ancestors' remains,
Mhm.
and skulls and scalps and sacred items, and a federal law that is supposed to return them from public museums and institutions to tribes. And there are still like 100,000 ancestors that are still in like UC Berkeley, Harvard,
Mm.
you know, all of these institutions that are dragging their heels. And the subject can be very overwhelming. And so that was another reason why Perry made for a better protagonist than Donis, because Perry has a lightness to her.
Mhm.
And I think that was very important for balance in this
Mhm.
story.
As you're talking about representation and sort of these institutions dragging their feet, I'm almost immediately thinking about what's going on in Florida. A teachers union, if I don't know if you know, but a teachers union in Florida has challenged the state's Department of Education over a law that teachers say is leading to book bans in the school. And I wonder, as you think about, I mean, part of the reason why they're dragging their feet is because people don't enough people aren't aware, like, it needs to be in the mainstream, it needs to be written about, it needs to be read in the school books. And I wonder what your thoughts are about banning important texts that can help inform another generation about just a more holistic insights into the real experiences of our diverse population, for example.
I feel like it's the squeaky wheel that
Mm,
is, but, and it's um, not a majority, but it's so loud that it sounds like a majority. But
yeah.
I think um, as a parent, I don't want some other parent choosing for my child what my child can
Mhm.
read or not read.
Mhm.
If you don't want your child to read a certain book, then don't have them read that.
Yeah.
But how dare you try to say that my child can't read that or my child can't learn this? I
Mhm.
just, but I understand too of people not feeling safe to speak up against this loud, um,
Yeah.
you know, segment of the population.
Mhm.
Um, I just, if we don't know the, if we don't know our history,
Yeah.
you know, we will repeat.
We will.
And mhm.
I wonder what policymakers get right or wrong about literature. Because I mean, another piece of it, some people might say, well, this is not the policymakers' space, really, right? So, what do you think policymakers get right or wrong about this issue, and even more importantly, about literature and what should be read or not read?
I think that the conversation, the things that we hold up as classics today, were in their day controversial.
Yeah.
And I think that, with time, uh, I think those things have faded. And so to know that the hate you give is
Mm,
going to be as revered as, um, you know, how people, their favorite classics of when they were in high school.
yeah.
Um, to know that I just, I think what policymakers, I worked in Washington, D.C., I worked at the U.S. Department of Education, and there are so many good people, working to improve public education for students um, and wanting to support parents in making, you know, uh, who want the, who want their kids to grow up and have the skills and knowledge to, be good citizens. And
Mhm.
um, I just, I think that somehow we need to figure out how to have a conversation with
Yeah.
the people who aren't speaking up. And because silence benefits the oppressor
Yeah.
more than the oppressed, and
Yeah.
that certainly is the case in our current dialogue, or rather lack of dialogue, regarding um, what we teach to our students and what kind of citizens we want in our country.
Beautifully said. Lots and lots of awards, book prizes, movie projects. What's next? And what should, just an extension of this conversation, what should advocacy and activism look like in terms of literature, reading books?
So there was an author whose book was going to be banned. It was like, being discussed and being, to be banned. And
Yeah.
his mother and auntie showed up at the school board meeting and were like, this is why, his book is so important. This is what he did, And then the school board voted and they voted not to ban the book. And
Yeah.
somehow, I would never encourage someone who didn't feel safe in a particular space to speak up and put themselves in peril if that's what they feel the stakes are. But
Yeah.
if for people who can speak up and advocate, to please do so. As for what's next for me, if you notice, Firekeeper's Daughter kind of included the element of fire. Warrior Girl Unearthed, the element of earth. Um, it's not been announced yet, but books 3 and 4. So I, I
Breaking
I'm
news.
I am just blessed and so very fortunate to be able to keep telling stories,
Yeah.
and um, that's yep.
Congratulations. I would love to have you back at another time, Angeline Boulley. New book, Warrior Girl on Earth, will be released May 2nd. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Miigwech, thank you so much.
And that's it for our program today. Remember, you can follow me and the show on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching Feminism Today on Free Speech TV. Join us again next week.